Hello, and welcome to the channel, world-renowned contralto Nicole Mitchell, and welcome back to the channel, voice theorist, pedagogy expert, teacher, Matt Brown. Welcome, everybody.
Oh, thank you. It's an
Thank you
honor
very
to
much.
be here. Thank you.
So today we're going to be talking about all things the contralto voice repertoire, as well as Nicole's extensive work in making opera accessible to the masses. So to be, and I forgot to mention, I saw you yesterday in the Carmelites. I was at the stage door and you were out of there. I didn't get the chance to say hello. You had your mask on and your hat, and you said, "Whoo."
And it was so funny. I had friends I was trying to catch, and so I wasn't sure which direction that they were coming from because they are also friends with Jamie Barton, and so I was trying to see which way. And I had texted them, and I didn't get a response back, and I didn't want to miss them. But even I have to be honest, even if that wasn't the case, that's usually the case where I'm out of there.
So to start off, how did you discover that you could sing? Period.
Well, the answer may be cheesy, but I believe in telling the truth. I grew up in a household. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, and my mom loved music. And one Christmas, I was a little girl growing up in Fort Greene, and one Christmas, I was on the floor, missing teeth. It was little Afro puffs or braids or something, and I was scribbling on paper, and the television was on PBS, and this man, this famous tenor, who I did not know of as because I was a little child, whose name was Luciano Pavarotti, he and this little boy soprano were singing Jesu Bambino. It was a Montreal Christmas concert, and they were singing this piece. And I remember my mother coming out of the kitchen, and I stopped what I was doing. And even as I tell you this story many years later, decades later, I still have that feeling inside of myself of like, whoa, like it landed in my spirit. But as a person of color, not just a person of color, as a black person, my mother was from Alabama. My father was from the islands. He was from Grenada. But my mom, I grew up going to church. And so I was always in the choir. And then when I was in school, every school that I went up to, uh, prior to committing myself to formally studying music, and when I say formally, I mean in post, after high school for undergrad and then my master's, there was always a choir. And if there was a choir in the school, I was in the choir. And if there was something outside, there was a bigger choir outside, I was a part of another choir. So music was always a part of me. But I grew up listening to classical music and to country music and to top 40, the mainstream Michael Jackson, Prince, Madonna, all of that stuff. But it was something that I discovered as a little child.
As you discovered your voice, you discovered that you've got this beautiful voice, but it's a very rare voice. You're a contralto instrument. What was the journey of discovering that?
Well, I always joke that when I was a little kid, my voice was like this. It wasn't, but I, so when I started formally training, and I would say, okay, when I'll go back to pre, leaving high school and things like that. My mother, I took lessons, and so like I said, I was always in the choir, and I loved singing. It was something that I felt, and I had a teacher who loved my voice, and he had told my mother when I was actually in elementary school. He told my mother, he said, "That's a voice." Now at that time, I was like probably 9, 10 years old. Mr. Logan was his name. I remember him. God rest his soul. But he told my mother, "That's a voice." But when I was in high school, I was taking voice lessons, and I went to the Brooklyn Music School and Playhouse, which is right behind BAM, Brooklyn Academy of Music, still is there. And I studied with Albert Rhodes, and he was my first formal voice teacher. And when you're studying, your voice is changing. You're a teenager, and so I was like 15, 16 years old, and so my voice wasn't, of course, what it is now. But I was not a soprano. I mean, I had soprano-y notes, but I was definitely in the alto range. But it was a journey from that in high school, and then going to undergrad. I went to Buffalo State College there, and when I went actually to become I wanted to become a an English literature teacher, but that was because I was afraid of stepping into music. I was, because it's vulnerable. And so when I was there, I didn't know a lot of things. So, getting the 24 Italian art songs, which is like the Bible of singing for youngsters. And, the range and the color was there, but I sang mezzo repertoire. But there was something always innate, especially as I moved closer and closer to my late teens and then my early 20s and then mid 20s. And I heard about the contralto voice, and I started to listen to people like Kathleen Ferrier. And of course, I had been told about Marian Anderson, but these voices, these rare voices, and I was like, that's me. And so I felt it, but for many years I was under the Mezzo banner. I still have old resumes that say Mezzo, and but I would say the past 10, 15 years I have accepted, I would say maybe even 20 years, I accepted that I am indeed a contralto.
Just out of curiosity, because it's something I've personally dealt with. Like, were you ever insecure about having a low voice? Yeah, because I'm just now starting to get used to mine.
I love it. Well, yes, because you're isolated. You don't, like one of my dearest, and I mean dearest, my sister, I call her my sister. Her name is Charmaine Muzakio. She is a contralto. And she and we just we bonded, just not even so much about music. We just liked each other, and she's just a beautiful soul. But when I was at Manhattan School of Music, where I went to do my master's, I entered there as a mezzo. I auditioned as a mezzo, even though my spirit, everything inside of me was like, "No, honey, you're a contralto," but you're still kind of young-ish, so you don't land there immediately. I just remember warming up one day, and my range, I had a high range, but I could also go low, and it was full. It had body. And I did feel a little insecure about it because who else was there doing that other than a tenor or a baritone? And I remember one day warming up, and if you you explore your range, like you warm up high, you warm up the middle, you warm up low, all of that. And my low was I could go down to a low D, I could go to a low C, like in Schubert's Death and the Maiden, that there is a low D that is optional. And you can tell who's going to sing that low D if they're a mezzo or contralto. You can tell because you can't fake down there. I could sing that. But I remember one day warming up in a classroom before class started. Because anywhere there was a piano, if you couldn't get to a rehearsal room, the practice room to practice, oh, I'm in this room, I'm going to warm up, I'm going to take advantage. And then I heard somebody outside the door say, "Oh, is that a guy or something?" No, no, the door opened because the teacher was coming in, and somebody said, "Oh, I thought that was a guy," and there was this laughter, and I pretended like I didn't hear it, but I did hear it, and I kind of got my feelings hurt a little bit. But then I was like, something said, "No, honey, you got it. That's what they want. That's what you have." And so I had to step away from that ignorance because people can say things off the cuff. And I understand. Trust me, I get it. But let me tell you, I love having this voice because when a true contralto comes in to sing, especially the everlasting Messiah, and you get a contralto to come and sing "O Thou That Tellest," honey, there's nothing like it. And I've heard fabulous people sing it. I've heard countertenors sing it beautifully. I've heard mezzos sing it. But when you get a contralto, because it gets down up in there, you gotta let them know. You gotta let them know about that tellus.
So you mentioned you started as a mezzo, and you were like, "I'm no, 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 I'm a contralto." So how did you know you weren't a soprano? But how did you know you weren't the mezzo? Or how would you describe the difference between the two? Because I know people expect mezzos to sound like contraltos.
Yes, well, that's always a funny thing because there's some repertoire where a mezzo, because one, they don't have a lot of contraltos, so you're singing certain roles, and so you're going to give it to a mezzo. And that mezzo, it's not that they don't have the range to go low, but they don't have the I would call the meat and potatoes of it. And there's a certain timbre of it that's lacking. They can fake it to a little bit, but at some point your voice is going to tell on you. Your DNA is going to tell on you. And I knew I wasn't a soprano because I had people, their works like, for example, Eboli in Don Carlos, and the Met just did it. They did two versions. They did the French 5 acts, and they did the 4 act version in Italian. And I remember learning that aria, O Don Fatale, and and I love the aria to a degree, but I was like, this girl is high. and and I, as I got, education is a real thing, and learning about who has sung the role. Like, for example, Shirley Verrett, God rest her soul, she sung the role, and she lived her life both as a soprano and as a mezzo. Grace Bumbry, she sung the role, and she lived her life was both as a soprano and a mezzo. And so education is a real thing. So as I worked on some things, and I said, okay, I can go there, but I can't hang out there. And also the pieces that, because I do have high notes, and but there are pieces that will tell the truth on you, and it sits in a place where you're like, I can do this for a little bit, but I don't want to live here. But when I was truly introduced to contralto repertoire, La Tia Principessa and Suor Angelica, with her mean behind, she comes in. I mean, she comes in, gangbusters, honey. But it you can, when you start to hear a mezzo voice do it and a contralto voice do it, it makes you sit up differently. And so there's a part of it that is the education part, when you're warming up where the voice likes to sit and where it doesn't. And also being careful that you don't step into fear making the decision, because a lot of people are fearful of high notes. And that's because they don't have the support. But you have to know, where are your high notes? How does it sit? And what is your tessitura? Where does your voice like to hang out? And where does your voice say, I'm out of here? Having those experiences and the education, and also, and I can never stress this enough, that innate feeling that says, tells you the truth, because I've had friends who trained as mezzos, and particularly black women, and they really were sopranos, but because of the way they looked, and because there's a psyche about, there's some sort of thing about, being black and you're the darker voice, that is not true. I had friends who were singing mezzo repertoire, and they did it for as long as they could, and people still wanted to throw it at them, but their voices were like, no, I'm a soprano. I mean, is there mezzo repertoire I can sing as a contralto? Absolutely, to a degree. But there are certain things where I'm like, oh no, that's mine. Grab.
That's really interesting that you bring up these different roles which become available, because a lot of times the roles are how we sort of understand the differences between voice types. Can you sort of talk about what's the difference between, let's say, like a coloratura contralto, like Arsace and Semiramide, like the Rossini sort of characters, versus like a Verdian or a Wagnerian contralto, like Ulrica or Erda? How do those voices
Well,
present themselves differently?
well, it's about technique, and again, knowing what your voice can do. And like I stepped into, actually, it's an aria that I want to add back into my repertoire. This is hence Iris
Iris
hints
Hints
away.
Away.
Yes, which is a fabulous aria. And I hadn't sung that in a while, and I have an audition coming up, and I was trying to add that, and I said, "No, girl, you can sing it, but not yet. You got to shape that, knowing what the voice can do." Because see, Rossini, depending on it, he can sit high. He can sit high and lift it up, and so you have to know what your voice does. And the great practice that I have had, and before I get to start talking about Wagner and Verdi, because for Wagner I have performed the role of Erda, and I love it, and I can't wait to perform it again because that's my girl. We like this. We're tight, and I love her. And Ulrika I love, but and I'll talk about that because that girl goes high. And it's like Verdi, really? Why couldn't you just let us say it? Nu la pugnula, la, la, la. Why couldn't you just leave it alone a bit? Let us do it once and let me go home. But anyway, the great practice that a mezzo sings, and that for my voice type, a mezzo person started as a mezzo who was really truly a contralto, was the gift of the Messiah because it is easy, or yeah, I'll say easier music. There's some light arias in there that a young mezzo and a young contralto in training explore. And then when you listen to, especially Baroque writing, and then of course the later coloratura writing, you get to listen to other people do it and how they explored it. It goes, oh, you go, oh, well, I would like to try this. And you see what your voice does. Like, for example, Marilyn Horne, she was once a soprano, then lived her life as a mezzo, and she had extraordinarily wonderful, fabulous low notes, but she was not a contralto. She could move in that contralto range, though. I mean, what an instrument! What an instrument! But that voice could move. But you have to know what your voice does, and also, again, don't get stuck up here, not saying, "Oh, I can't do that," because if you say you can't, then you're right, and if you can, you're right. But you have to do it. You have to know the technique. But things like Verdi and Wagner, Wagner and Verdi, I found them to be very expansive. They really require a lot of you got to have breath. I mean, all of it you have to have breath, but there's an expansiveness that that I find with Wagner and Verdi that you really have to play the long game, and not to say the others that you don't, but it really is about the line.
And on the topic of exploring what your voice does and the technique that makes it all possible, passaggi, I feel like, are a big deal with telling, once again, these difference with voices. Where do you feel like most contraltos tend to feel their two main passaggi, and how do you tend to manage them in a lower voice?
And I have to preface this by saying, splitting up the repertoire from pre 20th century music and post century 20th century music, and now where we are with contemporary music, because the writing is very different, but where your voice likes to go and where it finds its home, as I would call it, is always true, but different material will test how you approach it. So I would say for the lower part of the range, like for the contralto voice, for I know for myself, top part is definitely that E F or an F G in that area there. The middle area, I would say definitely that again that E F G, that because it's the mix. You're trying to get to, you got your head, then you have your middle voice, and then switching out of that is very tricky depending on what is written, how it's being approached. And I have to preface this by saying, splitting up the repertoire from pre 20th century music and post century 20th century music, and now where we are with contemporary music, because the writing is very different. But where your voice likes to go and where it finds its home, as I would call it, is always true. But different material will test how you approach it. So I would say for the lower part of the range, like for the contralto voice, for I know for myself, once I get below C and actually below G and below, okay, let's have it. Let's bring it. You don't live down there, which is where you get into a tricky thing with dealing with contemporary composers, because some people want you to live there, and it's like, no, those are my money notes. It's like you have a soprano who has a bunch of high C's, you don't keep writing them over and over again because it can be taxing to the voice. You have to know where to spend your currency.
You also sing a lot of music that's outside of like mainstream classical. Do you feel that a low voice is still a low voice when it goes to sing pop music or jazz music and other styles?
Yes, it's about singing what's right for you. Like I love Nina Simone, and actually I've been looking at Pirate Jenny, and I love her version of Pirate Jenny. I love it. I'm like, that's the version. You just have to know again what is right for you. I'll tell you a story. I was after Buffalo State College, so this was I was in my early 20s. Rent was on Broadway. Rent was a big deal, and they were having auditions. And I love that music, and so I said, "Well, I'm going to go for an audition." And I got there, and I made it to the next round. But my voice in the world of musical theater, because that's also something that can go either way, and especially where contemporary opera is right now, it can feel a bit musical theater and not. You know what I mean? And so I went to my second round, and my voice was getting into this operatic voice, and they were like, "Well, can you do it without the opera? That like, because you're going into this." And then I was like, "No," and I already knew. I mean, my heart was broken because I was like, "I want to be in this show," because there's some shows you like, "I want to show, I want to be up in this show," but it wasn't right for me. And so the voice is going to be what it is. You still have to choose the right repertoire. Like I love me some pop music. I love me some heavy metal. So all of that stuff, and like the American Songbook, it's available in different keys. It's available for a reason because some people had a higher voice to do it. Some people had that middle solid, and some people had that low voice. I mean, like wow, so it's a lot that's there, but you got to be smart. You have to be smart and knowing where your voice likes to sit.
On that topic of like where it sits, where would you say like is the general tessitura for a contralto?
Well, I would say the general tessitura is like in that F sharp. E. I would say in that E F sharp G range, perhaps even in the A. You can like get a few A's out of there, but that's a little tricky. But I would say that E F sharp G and G sharp. So I'll do E F sharp G sharp A flat range. And as far as because it's important to me to point it out, that middle tessitura also, again, it mimics in that E, F, F sharp, because there's that mix. And then on the low side of it for contralto, I would say, and also, my new thing is saying leave room for an asterisk because every voice is different. And my voice, when I play with it, I can go below a C, a low C. Now, would somebody write there? Sometimes some people have, but it's like if they're writing several of them and the orchestration's not right, no. But the general tessitura for the low part would be, I would say, in that F E again in that D E F on the low side. So it's expansive. It runs. That's the cool thing about the contralto voice for me.
So you're covering more range than the other voice types, if I'm
Pretty much. I mean, this is how I describe it when people talk about, want to know, okay, what's different about the contralto voice? So most people that I have met have had some sort of relationship with a choir, either at church or maybe in school in their lives. So they know the SATB, soprano, alto, tenor, baritone, bass, because the true bass is a rare thing, but, bass or bass baritone. And so I describe it as having what's special about the contralto voice is that its main home would be in the alto range, but it does run into the soprano range on its higher side. It can run into that, but then it can go into the tenor range and it can surpass the tenor range and go into the upper middle part of the bass range, bass baritone. And that is what makes it unique. And it's about the color, the timbre of the voice, and the strength. Like you don't hear somebody struggling because I've heard some people struggling. Like, honey, you know you can't sing that note down there. Bring it up an octave or so. Do an alternate note. But it's that's where it is. For me.
Continuing on the topic of like all these different styles of music, you sing three, four, five different types a week because you're part of the Met chorus. How did you get there? Or what was that journey like getting there?
Well, here's the thing. So I'm in the extra chorus. So they bring the extra chorus. So there's a full time chorus and there's the extra chorus. Extra chorus is brought in when they're doing these big works like Aida. So in 2018, I got a friend of mine told me about the Met having auditions for Porgy and Bess, and they were having it, and they asked me if I was doing it. I had no idea that they were doing these auditions, and there is this thing among Black artists not wanting to make their debut, especially in an A house with Porgy and Bess, because there tends to be that's what we'll hire you for and hire you for only. And people have had that in their lives. And so I almost didn't go, but something said, Nicole, just go and sign up, girl. Just go let them know you're alive. And just go and sing and then, just walk on out. Go do your thing. And of course I was nervous or whatever. And they just wanted to hear one piece from you. And I went and I had a feeling. I said because in the choral form, I would mostly be put in an alto two range, so that's where a lot of contraltos sit, or sometimes they'll put the tenors there, um, but to get that sound. But I went and they said that I was told I think that we wouldn't know anything until like maybe in the spring, March, or April. So I had my audition in December. I got a call in January, and I couldn't, you couldn't post about it or anything like that. But I got a chance to tell my mother that I was offered, and I accepted because I said, Nicole, just even if you do it once, just go up in there, and even if it's the only thing you do at the Met, okay, let's just go have the experience. And it turned out to be the right thing for so many reasons because my mom passed away in July of 2019, and I had her funeral. She died in New York, but she was from Alabama, Montgomery, and her funeral was on August 3rd on a Saturday in 2019. And I came back on the 4th, and that on the Monday the 5th I was at the Met, and I wasn't sure if I was going to go because I had contacted them to say, this is what's going on, and they were very kind and very supportive. But it was where I was. I did show up, and part of that was also because of my mother's blessing. My mother always supported my being an opera singer. She didn't order it, but it was my path. And she never said, oh, you should go get a real job or you should think about a safety net. My mother was so supportive. So when I went with her blessings. It wasn't easy, but I was at the right place. And I got to tell you, that sound from that first rehearsal, and I knew several people in there. A lot of people I didn't know their mamas had them, but we got a chance to know each other in rehearsals. But that sound, and I heard this from friends of mine who have been principals there, who have sung there for years, and they said, "Oh, they're not ready for this. This sound is unlike anything else," and it was spectacular. Next thing I knew, I was being invited back, and for the 21-22 season, and I was ready. I said, "Okay, I got several things in here." I was ready. I said, "Let me in." You know how they said, "Let me in, coach. Let me in." And I was so happy to be there for other operas outside of Porgy and Bess, because they did bring Porgy and Bess, and I got a chance to be a part of history with "Fire Shut Up in My Bones," the first opera written by a black composer and both a black librettist to be presented at the Met. So that was full circle for me.
It's just such a beautiful experience. I am so happy that you had your mother's blessing and support throughout your entire career. It's a
Oh
beautiful,
yeah.
beautiful thing to hear. So as an extra chorus member, and I'm sure you're very well aware of sort of the responsibilities the full time chorus members. We're a lot of communication. I'm really curious, what is that working life like? Do you have to learn 7-part harmony and check in a week if you find out they're doing Rusalka? Do you have like notice? Like, what's the life like?
So they already their seasons are decided years in advance, and they plan it out, and they go through and say, okay, this is an opera that we will need extra courses for. This one we may not need extra courses for. We'll need some extra, or we may not need your extra chorus or voice, because some voices, some works are very male heavy, but so they plan it out knowing already. There's Maestro Donald Palumbo, and he knows he's the choral master, and he knows what he needs extra on and what he does it, and it's set out accordingly. So when you get your contract, it says these are the operas that you are we would like to offer you. These are the tentative rehearsal dates, but these are the performance dates because the performance dates are locked in. So you got to go through your schedule, and so it's all planned out. Like they wanted me for the entire year, but I couldn't be there, which I was so excited to be a part of it for the entire year, but I couldn't because I had a contract with Santa Fe Opera to premiere a new work. So, but they said, okay, well, when you finish with that, come on in November. And so I'm there until June.
Speaking of working as a contralto, this is an actual question I would like to pose to both of you guys because Matt studies opera, but also Nicole, you actually sing the contralto repertoire. How, from like early music up until now, how has there been any evolvement or evolving in the contralto repertoire? Like, do you feel like the music is better, or are you guys getting better roles or more leading roles? Because usually, at least from my understanding, contraltos are just like grandmothers or witches or things like that.
Yes, the witches and itches. I'll say that. I'll just keep it clean, keep it classy. But in regards to traditional repertoire, there are so many things that happen with people hiring you. One, they have to know that you're alive and you're available. And I've had pieces. I've met some people later who didn't even know I was alive, and they said if I had known, I would have had you. Like, where were you? And there were people who have known I was alive, but I was busy with something else. So there are lots of opportunities there. But as far as the classical repertoire, I know for myself, having made most of my career in contemporary opera, there is so much more of the classical rep, both in oratorio, both in art song, and in opera that I want to explore. Because a lot of those folks, they studied the voice, they studied it, and they knew how to write for the contralto voice. And that stuff I want to pull myself more into. But because contraltos are rare, they often end up putting I mean, we're out there. We are definitely out there. They often end up putting a mezzo in there. But as far as the roles, I mean, it depends on just so many factors, like who you're working with, who knows who, because it's another game of who's in with who, whatever. And when the contemporary world of opera, I've gotten recommended so many times to so many people, which I'm so grateful for. Where somebody said, "Oh, that Nicole Mitchell, that's who you need. Oh, you're looking for a contralto? That's who it is." And I've had the opportunity to workshop because that's where a lot of things are initially. You're workshopping contemporary operas, and I also try to remind myself all opera was contemporary for its time. All of it was contemporary, and all of it wasn't always well received. A lot of it was, but it varies. It varies, but there are opportunities.
Yeah, I would just say on the topic of everything being contemporary and not always being a success, we always forget Traviata failed its first night out.
Yes, Traviata was not a hit.
I think as like the years have gone on, like as we just watch the music as it's grown from 1600 to what people are writing and doing now. What I sort of think some of the greatest successes for contraltos, they've sort of had to grab on accident, because there's a lot of music that maybe was originally written for castrati that is suddenly, oh wait, no, she sounds brilliant as Orfeo. Oh wait, no, all these pants rolls, with the Handel and the Mozart, that sort of a lot of contralti can do, but they're not originally designed for them. Or like certain mezzo roles that maybe don't sit very high, that then become very successful. Like how many contralti got their start singing Tatiana's sister in Onegin? That's a mezzo part, but
Yes.
it's so many contraltos are great at it. So I think sort of things change with time and things change with expectation. And then we also have to remember these words and these labels change with meaning over time. Because like when Rossini was writing Cenerentola, he considered that she was a contralto, and she's got a range from low G to high B. She has to sing
Yeah.
every note that exists. So, like, these words change meaning over time as well. So that also changes what people write and how they begin to understand it. 50 years from now, all the music that Jake Heggie writes for lyric mezzos, people might think that's contralto work in 75 years. I have no idea. Like, everything has to like be open to moving with time.
Yes. I 1,000% agree with you. The other thing is to note when, speaking that opera was, contemporary at any moment in time, was that they were writing for specific singers. And
Yes.
that is something that is still an issue now, because there are some voices that I just describe them as freakish. They just they just and I love it. I love it. There's no shade. I love it, and I'm fascinated. But if you want your work to last beyond that singer, you're going to have to give some alternate notes,
Hmm.
because I had there was it was a lovely piece, and this was at American Opera Project, and this was years ago. I think this was for their 25-year anniversary or something. With some, and I was brought in as one of the singers to sing some of the works of different composers, and I said, well, they've worked with me, so they know I was a contralto. But there was this one piece that went on up to had this B flat and or B. I can't remember because I wanted to forget that. But this note, it was high and it was on the vowel that was like an I, um, like it was on an I sound, like the I, and I was like, And they sent me the video of the girl, the woman, not girl, the woman who sang it. Beautiful instrument, beautiful voice, but it was freakish. And once she wasn't a contralto, she was a mezzo who she had those, she could go to that upper range and hang out. I was like, not me, you know, not me. And I was trying. I was really trying my best to see, because the word was sign, SIGN. The word was sign, and I was like, who sets a word like this on a B flat or B whatever? Who sets it up there like that? And of course, as a singer, it's not I. It's gonna be an ah sound. But even still, even once you know what it is, it didn't make sense. And I was trying my best, and I was trying to think of a hot needle hitting my behind in order for me to sing this note. And I was just like, listen, I'm gonna give it my best, but I'm gonna have to find an alternate note because this is not happening. Not if you want me to sing it, no, because that's another thing about speaking up for yourself as an artist. But working with as you were saying, Matt, about uh, how things change through the years. There's so many variable points to make. One, who's available, what voice types are around, and and that's a great. I don't know Jake Hagee's music that well. I do have friends who have sung his music a lot. But yeah, you're right. There are things that can be looked at differently at different times. But what I wanted to say was when you spoke about Tatiana's sister and Onegin, if you're used to hearing it one way and you can't imagine it another way, that becomes the norm. But all of a sudden, when another voice comes in and says, "Oh, this is what I can do with it," people sit up and listen. They go, "Oh, I like that." It's like when people audition and they say somebody, I don't know who said it. Some people contributed to Lucille Ball, but if somebody's looking for, you can look and be the most juiciest, ripest peach in the world. But if they're looking for apples, they're looking for apples. But if you walk in and somebody says, "Oh, you know what? Maybe we do want peaches," because people, things can change on a dime, but you just never know.
Recently, so a couple of days ago, you did a work with them. I believe you were Harriet Tubman. Was it Harriet Tubman?
Yeah, so I did that in 2014, and I was supposed to do that in 2020
Hmm.
when everything. I was supposed to do that at Knoxville Opera when everything changed. But I had performed the work. I played Ritia, so Harriet Tubman. When I crossed that line to freedom, was written by Nkeru Okoye, a fabulous composer, Nigerian descent. And yeah, I had the honor of premiering that in its complete full work.
So, can you talk a little bit about your work and the mission of the American Opera Project?
Well, the work is for to introduce both new singers and composers and librettists and even poets, to bring them together to one. They have a fabulous program called Composers and the Voice, and what that was is about is bringing composers together and librettists and or poets and singers, so that the composers can learn that different voice types can learn how to write for different voices. So it's all about exploring. And then out of that, sometimes will come an opera, and they'll say, "Oh, we would like to see where this goes and help to develop it a little bit more." So they do a lot of workshopping, and they will do presentations of different pieces, like one act, so people can see what's happening, who's out there. So it becomes this wonderful forum. I came in, my dear friend Greg Trupiano, who passed away in 2020. I was an apprentice at Sarasota Opera, and he met me because I had done my first Verdi Requiem in New York, and like I think that was like 2000. Good Lord, 2006. I can't remember. A long time ago, and he liked my voice, and he wanted me to come and audition. But he lived in Brooklyn, and he had a connection with the American Opera Project, and so somebody was working on a piece, Lee Hoiby, but they needed this woman. They needed a female voice to play both a 16-year-old and like a nosy 80-year-old. And I was brought in, and I had never heard of American Opera Project. And as a singer, you want to work because you got to have some money. And so I went, and I met them, and I've been in their lives, they've been in my lives for since then. And so I got the chance to meet different composers. The next thing I knew, there was a song cycle that was commissioned for me, songs from the F Train, F as in Frank, by Gilda Lyon, and which she took. She's a white female composer, but she took the poetry of three little black girls and set them to music, and I premiered the work. So it's that kind of relationship of, it's about new, it's about birth. Like, what are we? Here we are exploring this, that, and the other.
That's really exciting that so much of your career with them and just in general has been focused on contemporary opera, the things that will hopefully, be the big things that sell out the tickets like Aida and the Opera House in a few years. Because your career is so focused on contemporary opera, my questions, when you're working with these composers, and when you're learning this new music, how much do you feel like how much do you feel like you're hindered by the lack of history? The fact that you can't go back to a recording and that you have to rely on your piano skills, do you ever feel like that's holding you back?
No, so here's the thing with contemporary opera, and I've made my peace with it. I am not a pianist. I can play my notes, I can do chords. I've made my peace because I love the piano, but I had a teacher who used to hit my fingers, and I really it was traumatizing. I was traumatized. I got stories, but anyway, but I made my peace with it. I mean, I can go and fool around, but I'm not a pianist. So what the thing is now is that often people will give you an MP3 or a file that will play your music in the context of the music, not to learn from, but to really give you a perspective of how it works and how it all fits together. Because a lot of contemporary music, my experience, with the exception of a few, is that a lot of it is intellectually written and there are no melodies, very few melodies, and it's like, wait a minute, you wrote this in G major, and all of a sudden you want me to pull out, but you got all these tritones happening within, and it's not even a key. You got all these tritones and things happening, and you want me to pull out. You haven't played an F for a while, and all of a sudden you want me to pull an F out, and it's a higher F, so because your ear, how it's listening, it changes. It's so they have to provide you with some sort of a working of a piano vocal sound base so that you can listen to, or like an orchestral sound, which I've had to tell, because I've done that several times, and I had to tell people I've worked with. I said, because when they have the voice, the voice part, they'll have this that sound, and I said, no, I need a clarinet because it cuts through all of that. I said I need to have, so I can hear, but I don't learn from it because it's annoying to learn from, because the human voice likes to expand and likes to pull back, and once it's on a track, it keeps going. So that always kind of gets in the way of it. But the thing that has helped me is
Mm-hmm.
that I get it. I know what to ask for. I get what they're doing, and I now am smart enough to ask when people want me to sing something. Can you send this something to me? Because I don't want to say yes yet. I don't say it like that. Let me see if this is something I'm right for. Because there's some stuff. It's like, why why did you write it like that? But it is, it doesn't take away from me. If anything, it has given me a lot of skills that has helped me.
And then to follow up with that, have you found, because so much of your focus is on contemporary music, have you found that you've had to work harder or work differently to find coaches with people that are comfortable coaching you in it and are not only familiar with the mainstream repertoire?
Well, the good thing is, because, great to be in New York City, great to be in a place where so many people are working things out, that they usually have a pianist at the ready to work with it. And so that's a plus for me. For example, recently, having done the Fannie Lou Hamer opera last year, I had a colleague of mine who lives in Rochester, New York, who had a challenge trying to find somebody to work with her, to work with this piece, because the music was hard. Like, it was really counterintuitive, and so you needed to go against pretty much everything you knew to shape this piece. I mean, there were some great things in there, but there are some people that's not their area, and so it's a struggle for them too. So I've been really lucky that I have had people here in New York to work with, because they know they're going to need somebody.
One of the most interesting things that you mentioned in the things that you're working on currently is a trend that I'm starting to see, and I hope you can really help bring it into the future and we start to see more and more singers doing it. I would just really love for you to talk about your experience as a classical singer who's choosing to write their own material. Every other
Oh,
genre of music does it, and we are finally starting, and it's so exciting to me.
oh, thank you. Well, I've always had things that I've written or sung, and a lot of things I didn't share. One of the things that I shared recently, it happened last year, when my friend Greg Trupiano, who was big in the opera world, he knew everybody, and a lot of people knew him, and a lovely person. there was a bench dedication to him in Fort Greene Park. And I had been writing some music and keeping it to my chest. I was invited to sing a work, and preferably something using the works of Walt Whitman, because he was a Walt Whitman Knight, and he is the second most used poet outside of Shakespeare, whose works have been set to music, which is totally I get it. But I went looking for a piece, and then something said, "No, you write it. You write the piece." Because there was a poem that I would always recite at the end of. We would do these Fort Greene Park and Fort Greene Park Conservancy and AOP tours. So I would. It was a history tour, and I would go on it because there's a Walt Whitman house that is still there. They're still trying to get it protected, but I used to always sing poets to come to speak it. And so I set that to music and I sang it. And the response from those around was tremendous. And I felt good about it. And first I was like, Nicole, you had those high notes in there. I'm like, well, you wrote it, girl. Go on and sing it. But it's a need to express yourself. It's a need to say, I have something else to say, because as an artist, as a singer, you are constantly singing somebody else's work. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's wonderful. But I would be a liar if I said, oh, it was always fulfilling, because sometimes it's not. You're bringing you. I always see every opportunity to perform is also learning, because I love the putting together of things. But there's something said, Nicole, you have something to say, and also as a black person, George Floyd, when that happened, and of course on that amongst other things, I was like, Nicole, you have something to say about this. And I remember Questlove asking, where are the protest songs of now? And there was this whole discussion, and I'm like, I'm gonna write a protest song, and I started to do that, and I was committed to it. It's a yearning, and it's a something that says I have to do this.
So, my last question, I just need to make sure I have it on record. It's actually for both of you guys again. So, like, when I read about the contralto voice, any books, the voice teachers get an attitude just writing about it. So it's just like, why is the voice, or that particular voice, so hard to trade?
One of the things that is a challenge is that one, people don't work with it often, and so they don't know. How do you train for something that you just have no, not say no concept, because there's a bit of a concept, but all of it now is rolled into one. It's like, how do you deal with a refrigerator that's also a car and also an airplane? And I know that's very far fetched, but you know what I mean. It's like you don't have a I mean, you have a little bit of reference because they all have some sort of engine. They all use power. They have some. There's a cooling system. There's a heating system. There's something all connected, but it's something very different. And I think people, they don't have the experience, and also when they go to train somebody, who they have to train. Like I remember being asked as a well to be considered to be a part of the voice and composers program, because they reach out to different singers. They'll have a countertenor, they'll have a tenor or baritone, bass baritone. They'll have a variation of voices, a coloratura, a lyric, whatever, and they'll present them. And I remember being asked about it, and I thought it could be exciting, but then I was not invited to it, and it was no, there was no shade. There was nothing ill about it, because I'm a person who believes you are where you're supposed to be, and where you need to be your best self, and to learn whatever you need to learn. And that has always worked out for me when I look back. Doesn't mean I haven't cried about some things, but it has always worked out for me. And I was not invited to do it because they felt that it would be limiting. And in my mind, I was like, that's because they don't know. They need to know about this voice type. They need to be given an opportunity. And actually it's not limiting. You just have to know how to approach it. So I think it's a fear that happens. They don't get a chance to work with it. And so they don't. That's my answer. They don't have the experience, and so they're and I would be frustrated about something I don't like. Somebody asked me about writing about training kangaroos. I don't train kangaroos, or training a wildcat. I know a domestic cat, and you can't even train them. you know, Trying to do a wildcat, like no, I don't have a reference. So I think it's a fear and also a lack of interaction.
I think a lot of that's true. It's just like everything else when you're trying to diagnose what's going on with singing. There's about seven causes that you thought of and another five that you'll get to later. But I think that there's two big things that go into why people perceive the contralto voice as hard to train. I think the primary is like a cultural problem that we've had for like the past 60 years, where people think that a woman with a chest voice has cooties. They're really they're afraid to teach you to be in touch with your low notes. They're afraid to build the voice from the bottom up. They say, "Oh, she's a soprano. Why is she singing a low A? Because she's read a Verdi score and because she's going to need it. So imagine what the mezzis and the contraltis need." So I think people are really afraid for to hear a woman in full power of her chest voice. I really think that sound has kind of come out of fashion and needs to come back. And so people are afraid to teach it because they think it's going to ruin the high notes. And that's absolutely not the case when sung properly. That beautiful, strong low is going to support that beautiful, strong middle, which is going to support that beautiful, strong top. If any one part of it gets too heavy, you're having problems. But if that chest voice can scare people, if it could go from making people scared to making people excited, I think we could get a difference in training. And the other thing that I think is on the back end of why people find them hard to train is because the contralto voice basically presents with lower voices. Passaggi tend to be a bigger deal. A bass, it's harder for them to get over certain things than it is for, with a baritone. The passaggi tend to be firmer. And contraltos tend to have three big passaggi in their voice that I notice. There's like F at the bottom of the staff, then there's like B, C in the middle, and then there's F up at the top, where you're trying to get from one area to the other. And everywhere you sing is a giant passaggio negotiation. And so it takes a lot of training and a lot of evening things out before they start to sound like what they're supposed to. There's a steeper learning curve because you really have to learn how to navigate these passaggi.
I love that. Everything you said, I so agree. And it made me what you were saying about especially going into those that lower part of the voice and why it scares people. I remember Betty Allen. God, I miss her. I still hear her voice all the time. But she said, if you're going to go into the basement, you got to know how to come out. Don't close the door behind you. Come. You got to know how to get out of it. And that's the thing about patience, having the patience to teach a voice. And also, contralto voices tend to be big voices. And I don't know if any of you know Patrice Eaton, but her mom, Patricia Pates Eaton, she recently passed. And brilliant woman, very smart woman. And she said to me something that stayed with me even to this day. She said, big voices take time. She said, it's a Mack truck. This is not, she said, a big voice is not something, it's not a Ferrari, it's not a Ferrari, it's a Mack truck. And you have to know how to work that. And there are people who don't have the patience to do that. They get impatient and they want to see, oh, I want to see results. But if you want something good, honey, it takes time. And that's why I think also a lot of teachers get uh, deterred, and because there's a big a part of impatience, and there's also singers get burnt out because at some point when you're not being given the tools that you need from somebody who respects you and respects your time and will take time to nurture you, not to baby you, but to nurture what you need for what you need to do, not for what they wanted to do. If you become frustrated, you say, I'll do something else.
And we have to be very realistic here. The burnout and the frustration come from justified places. If you're 25 years old and everyone says you're going to sound so good when you're 40, how are you supposed to feed yourself for the next 15 years? It's realistic frustration. If you're burnt out because you know the career's just in the beginning and you maybe have 3 contracts a year, but you're not making too much money because even with that work, you still have to pay double rent and you don't get paid to rehearse and you have to deal with your lodging and oh shit, I forgot with that symphony concert, I have to buy a $900 gown. There's so much stuff that comes with it that your frustration, your burnout, it's something you have to manage because it comes from a justifiable place. It's not
Yeah.
unrealistic. It's real.
And I just want to, yeah, so it's very true. And I just want to add, a friend of mine pointed out, and there's several, I've heard several people, opera is like the only community that expects you to look like you've been making money all this time. You're
Yes.
supposed to look like you got a slew of designers just at the beck and call. No, that's not what it is, and that psyche has to change. I need to, when spoke about the $900 dress. There is a time to have a $900 dress when you can, but that's something to save towards. But you don't need that, and you find little ways of getting around things. And even for the gentlemen, I mean, gentlemen usually have it where they can rent something, but even after a while, sometimes you don't want to rent; you want your own. And so that psyche of playing into like, oh, you got to look like you came out the limo. Please, I got my Metro card, and I'm going to be swiping my Metro card. Every now and then, I will take a cab. But it that's another thinking of being burnt out is thinking that you have to look like you're this glamazon. You can work smart with a little and make it look like it's something.
Last question, I promise. So when did you start sounding like how you do today, or when did that voice come in for you?
Oh, that's a tricky thing because right now I'm in my mid 40s, and so the voice has, as my voice has aged, it has gotten better. Like I feel like, oh, we're in the pocket there. I understand certain things more, and I started to get out of my way. I mean, there's some things I'm still navigating, but I sound the way I do now because thank goodness for all of the lessons and master classes that I've just not participated in, but have observed and also in watching. And the thing that has always played in my mind is to be a smart singer, to be smart, to know the difference when I say yes, is it out of expediency or or is there something greater to it? Am I going to learn something valuable? Like on my first Verdi not opera, Requiem, I was paid $100, but here's the thing, I accepted that at the time because first of all, I had never done a Verdi Requiem, and it was with an orchestra, and it was an opportunity. And I didn't have the technique to sing it at the time. I mean, I had some things I navigated in some places pretty well. And there were some other places I was like, I don't know but I said yes. But I received so much from that experience. So from knowing where my voice is now and also filtering what other people have said and also listening more to my voice and to my body. I've had several people say to me, "Oh no, Nicole, you have soprano notes. You have soprano notes." No, yes, I have the range that goes up there, but my home is a contralto, and once I had to silence those voices and in a respectful way put people in their place, which meant that I needed to know my place. I know what my place is and what my voice likes to do, and owning it and stepping into the fullness of it. I started to sound this way the moment this changed. And I listened to my heart. I listened to my gut. And and that's when it settled. And it's still settling. It's a voice that as it gets older, it's fabulous. It can be fabulous. And you want to be healthy and smart.